I'm George Galloway, and I present كلمة on Al Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. كلمة means free word. That's what I speak. So كلمة is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al Mayadeen television. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, for Al Mayadeen television, coming to you from London with an audience of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs like me. Though we're coming from London, the subject matter very definitely affects the Arab world and the broader Middle East. It concerns the relationship between the British and indeed other Western governments and the royal dictatorship of Saudi Arabia, and principally the subject of arms sales. Many British people think that the last time we sold a barrowload of guns to the Saudi government was back in the 1980s, when it's true we were involved in the biggest sale of anything by anyone to anyone ever in history. That's right, the Al Yamama project, which earned British arms companies $40 billion. In the last 15 months alone, we've sold them more than £5 billion worth of weapons. Now, that could have remained a kind of subterranean secret between the British arms dealers, the British government, and the Saudi government, which doesn't allow much by way of free expression. Everyone could have been none the wiser, and some considerably richer, but for two things. First of all, the mounting concern amongst Western public opinion about the nature of the Saudi regime and political system, its treatment of women, its treatment of religious minorities, its treatment of people who want nothing more than the right maybe to have a say in how they are governed, maybe the right to put an X on a piece of ballot paper once in a while. That mounting concern came to a head with the sentencing of young boys of 15 and 16 when they committed the offense of going on a demonstration against their rulers and were sentenced to be crucified and beheaded. Crucified and beheaded in 2016 for going on a demonstration. That was already poisoning the well in Western public opinion about our best friends, the Saudi regime. Prince Charles said so on a royal visit to his fellow royals. Not so long ago, he was dancing around with a sword just to get into the spirit of things. I don't think he chopped any heads, but of course the regime with whom he was dancing have chopped hundreds of heads already this year in 2016. As a matter of fact, the Saudi system may have beheaded more people in 2016 even than ISIS itself. This was an existential problem for Western Saudi relations. But I said there were two, there are actually three. The second is the aforementioned ISIS. As ISIS became more and more identified in the minds of Western public opinion as just about the worst thing, certainly since Pol Pot in Cambodia, that any of us have ever seen with our own eyes. Ruthless, barbaric, merciless, mass murder is their stock in trade, and the growing suspicion that Saudi Arabia, or at least people in Saudi Arabia, were involved in the funding and the arming of this ISIS Al-Qaeda monster, which has shed so much blood caused so much carnage, and not just in the Middle East either. And the third thing is the war on Yemen. I said at the time, recalling Chairman Mao's dictum, in which he said, sometimes the enemy struggles mightily to lift a huge stone only to drop it on its own feet. I said at the time that the invasion of Yemen, the Saudi attack on Yemen, might very well be the cause of the death and destruction, not just of untold numbers of Yemenis, but of the Saudi dictatorship itself. Now, the proximate cause, Yemen, is responsible for two important developments which viewers should know about. The first was, early this year, a decision by the European Parliament, which by its nature is only advisory, but symbolically very importantly, when it decided to recommend to the European Union itself and to its member governments that they should no longer sell weapons of death and destruction to the Saudi regime. This was the first chink in the armor, the first brick knocked out of the wall that had previously hidden so much weapons dealing and profiteering between Western arms companies, their governments, and the Saudi regime. And the second, more recently, was the decision of the British Parliament's Foreign Affairs Select Committee to ask the British government to cease weapons sales immediately to Saudi Arabia, whilst the carnage in Yemen, in which thousands of people have lost their lives, almost all of them civilians, and of course, as is the way of these things, the majority of them women and children. Indiscriminate bombardment of Yemen's cities, including its capital city, Sana'a, on many, many occasions. Sometimes the sky is black with bombers, and the people can see nothing but these aeroplanes delivering death and destruction. Now, this is important not just in itself, but because, as has been acknowledged and admitted, British and American officials are actually in the Saudi war room helping to direct the war. This is not just a question of selling them the weapons, some of which, by the way, end up in the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria and in Iraq, but British and American and other Western officials are actually a part of the coalition of the killing in Yemen. Recently, after a particularly horrific act of mass murder by the Saudi coalition, in which more than 100 mourners at a funeral were bombed in the capital, Sana'a, the British and American governments demanded an immediate ceasefire in the hostilities. That has not happened. And the fact that it hasn't happened is an indicator of the extent to which the imagined puppet regime of Saudi Arabia was not necessarily going to obey every order from the puppet masters, and that it had, like Frankenstein's famous monster, once you build it, you're no longer entirely in control of it. That's why it's called a monster. The Saudi regime, armed to the teeth, is now pursuing a foreign policy which does not entirely coincide with the foreign policy that the British and particularly the American governments want them to pursue. And that's true in Syria, it's true in Iraq, and it is abundantly true in Yemen. So the scene is set, the stage is set for an intensification in Western societies of the isolation of the Saudi regime. And I say to any of the princes watching this program, be sure of one thing. When the day comes that you are no longer useful to the people who have kissed your noses for all these last decades, they will dispose of you just as ruthlessly as in the end they had to dispose of the Shah of Shahs, the mightiest dictator of them all, the Shah of Iran. And be sure of something else, Mr. Prince. Be sure that in the British Parliament right now, and I've no doubt in the US Congress also, be sure that they are already looking at the maps to see where you yourselves might have to be partitioned, divided, occupied, and regime changed. I believe that these next 12, 18 months are going to be decisive in the relationship between Western countries and the dictatorship in Saudi Arabia. And I predict, remember, you saw it here on Al Mayadeen television, that the Saudi regime is in for a very bumpy ride in its relations with Western governments over the next 18 months. Even though Hillary Clinton, she's made a right few reals. Hillary Clinton has never met a Saudi that she wasn't prepared to take money from. But even if she is the President of the United States, I believe big change is on the way. That's my point of view. I want to hear yours, which is just as valid as mine. And whoever wants to make the first contribution, who's got the microphone?
I've got
it's
the
my
microphone,
old friend, American, Republican, journalist, broadcaster, Charlie Wolf. Charlie.
Thank you, George. Now, your introduction was fantastic as usual. There's a lot I can understand, and I can actually agree with you. But in the reality of things, we have to remember a couple of things. First off, countries work in their own self-interest, and that's their right and their obligation. And a lot of it doesn't make sense. There's no consistency in any of it. Some of it is pretty scurrilous, so we have to accept some of that. Arms sales, we have to sell arms because we have to make money to make more arms that are better. I mean, I know everyone's going to look at me in horror, but you know, if we don't sell it, someone else is going to sell it. And there are arms, we need them to protect ourselves. But you're right on Hillary Clinton. And that was you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to start with, I'm waiting, as Donald Trump had mentioned, to see Hillary give back the money that she got. And I think we should also take a moment to applaud Rudy Giuliani. If you'll remember, right after 9/11, I think it was the Saudis that offered to give a big check for some sort of a school or memorial or whatever it was. He said, you can take your money, ripped the check up and gave it back to him. So, you know, there are some people with some principle. You know, I don't know the answer to this. I really don't. But one thing I will say, you know, we can cut off relations with the Saudis, but then we cut off relations with you know, who else? I mean, if you start looking at the way they behave, and they do behave horribly, there will be very few people we'll have any sort of relations with, and we won't be able to influence them in any way. So I think...
Well, of course, you agreed with much of what I said, and yeah. I agree with much of what you said.
Oh, gosh, don't let people know
it's
this.
Breaking out. Amity is breaking out across the aisle. But the need is to calibrate just how awful and just what breaking off relations means. Let me be clear. If anyone wants to invade Saudi Arabia, I'm with Saudi Arabia. Much as I hate the dictatorship, I will never support any foreign invasion of Saudi Arabia or any attempt to partition it, to break it up, like is happening in so many other Arab countries. Number two, neither am I saying we should break off relations with them. I'm saying we should stop selling them weapons. Now, the idea that we need to sell them weapons so that we can keep developing our weapons doesn't stand up to much.
Oh, I understand. On that point, I can understand people, like I said, looking in horror, but it's a reality that we need weapons to protect ourselves.
We do, and we can make them to protect ourselves. And if anybody comes here to harm us, we need to kill them with those weapons. But we don't need to sell them to the world's worst tyrants so that they can massacre their own people and the people of neighboring countries. in order to keep our own weapons systems up to date.
Unfortunately, we probably do. But again, it's the inconsistency of what national or foreign relationships are. And like I said, it's pretty weird and it's pretty unsavory. But this is what it's about. It's again, do we have the Saudis outside the tent doing what inwards, or inside the tent going outwards? And part of that relationship is the selling of arms. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality.
I think it's not part of the relationship. It is overwhelmingly the relationship. If you're selling billions of dollars of weapons to a regime, then that explains almost everything else. But what I'm arguing, Charlie, is that we're now reaching a critical mass of unhappiness in Western public opinion about the Saudis. Not just the examples I gave, but their exporting of the most extremist interpretation of Islam, their buying up of mosques all over the world, including here in our own country, the inculcation through these mosques of the most extreme views and attitudes. This is all fueling the kind of terrorist outrage that we say we're most concerned about.
I know. Let me bring up one other example. It's not often I agree with Barack Obama, but in his waning days in office, I agree wholeheartedly. You'll know recently there was a bill allowing American citizens, families of 9/11 victims, to sue the Saudi Arabians over 9/11. Now, of course, they claim, and that Saudi had nothing to do with it, though there were Saudis on the plane. I think the majority of them were Saudis.
13 of the 19.
Yeah. And Barack Obama had vetoed this, and it was then the veto was voted over by the Congress. They represented it, but where he was right in saying, again, he said, I feel for the families and I would like them to have compensation and to sue, but in that thing, the overriding factor was, if we're able to do that, will we then have the Saudis or Jordanians or South Americans saying, well, we got so-and-so coming through, we're going to sue them. And it's so you understand, it's not as easy as A, B, and C. It's one of those situations, I guess, when you're in the White House or at number 10, a lot of times decisions are, I got bad, worse, and even worse than that. What do I do? When it gets to that level. So no answer is right. No answer is right.
That's the worst thing you could have possibly agreed with Barack Obama about, because it's abundantly clear that, first of all, 13 of the 19 hijackers and mass murderers were Saudi citizens. And they were, many of them, on the Saudi payroll as students. Saudi Arabia is the fountainhead of their ideology, which is this Al-Qaeda, ISIS ideology, which has caused so much bloodshed around the world. I cannot imagine any court that would have turned down the petition of the families that were murdered on 9/11 in asking for compensation from Saudi Arabia. And we had the same thing here a bit longer ago, but Mr. Tony Blair, you must see my film, by the way, The Killings of Tony Blair, because it deals with this subject. Mr. Tony Blair stopped an inquiry by the Serious Fraud Office when it had already reached the point of being able and ready, willing to press charges, criminal charges, against British Aerospace, the biggest arms dealer, and others, including members of the Saudi royal family. Bandar Bush, who was so close to the Bush family, was regarded as a member of that family, former Saudi ambassador to your country. It is said that he personally trousered, pocketed $2 billion in illegal, corrupt kickbacks. And when he was asked about it on CNN, he said, so what? That's what he said. This arrogant, corrupt, wicked regime should not be being sold weapons by anybody who considers themselves to be democratic.
Maybe you'll support me then in electing Donald Trump to be president, because I think it'll be a whole different sort of a situation. I think because you never know what
it might be
expect.
different. It could be
better chance with him than with Hillary.
Well, look, Charlie, it's been wonderful agreeing and disagreeing with you, but we're almost at the end of the first segment. So let me sum up, if I may, before we go to the break. The question is, should we sell weapons to one of the world's worst dictatorships when our own laws require us not to, if those weapons are going to be used either for internal repression or external aggression? As a matter of fact, almost all of our customers use it for one or other or both. But in the Saudi case, it could not be more clear. They are internally repressing millions of their own people, and they are in front of our eyes externally aggressing against the poorest country in the Middle East and massacring huge numbers of people. So our own laws are being transgressed, and it's only a matter of time before someone brings that before the court, because governments don't have the right to break our own laws. And the courts may very well find that the conduct of the British government, in this regard at least, is illegal. And there are people, I can assure you, preparing just such cases right now. But Charlie makes the point that in international relations, you have to have some kind of relations, more or less, with everybody, though it would be better if that were more consistently applied. But there's one thing having relations with someone, and another thing saying that they're your best friend and that you're going to give them any deadly weapon that they ask for. There'll be much more of this discussion after this. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London and discussing Western governments' relations, particularly in the field of arms sales to the Saudi Arabian regime. Before we continue with the studio discussion, let me tell you that we took the كلمة camera out onto the streets of London to ask the public what they thought. Take a look at this.
Are the US and UK governments involved in Yemen's war by supplying weapons to Saudi?
Yeah, I totally think so. I think the US and British governments are really complicit in that war, but also so many human rights abuses around the world because of their allowing the arms trade to go on.
Yes, yeah, I absolutely think so. If we're providing them with arms, that's not helping. That's just enabling violence.
Yes, precisely for two reasons: oil, and because of the fact that as a global party, I would argue that the U.S. wants to be a major contributor of some type of something over in the whole entire Middle East.
Are the US and UK governments involved in Yemen's war by supplying weapons to Saudi?
Yeah, I think so, because us arming Saudi are just making the situation worse.
I'm a big in favour of non-conflict, but clearly my government isn't to agree with that.
What can be done to stop Saudi from committing war crimes against civilians in Yemen?
Well, the only reason why we are helping Saudi Arabia commit these atrocities in Yemen in some way is because we believe that the people that live in Yemen and somehow are terrorists. The only way the U.S. is going to make a difference is if we fight the war at home, stop the conservatives, and then eventually stop what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen.
If someone's so intent on doing things like that, they'll find other means of doing it, whether it's from arms traded from the West or whether arms trade from within Yemen.
I think firstly Britain should ban arms deals with Saudi, so at least to stop that side of it.
We have to do as much as we can to stop them supplying Saudi, because it's just killing loads of innocent civilians, which is not what the UK and US stand for, right?
What clever young people we have. I'm proud of the vox pops there. I'm not always So proud of them. Let's go back to the studio audience then. Yes, sir. You've got the microphone. You're next.
Yeah, Ahmed Al-Muayyad from Shiba for Democracy and Human Rights. You said you think there's big change will come. From which corner you see that the change will come? It's in the political or in the relationship with Saudi Arabia?
That's a matter for the Americans. What is a matter for me and for the British people in this audience is what the relationship of Britain is. Now, Britain is easily the second biggest supplier of weapons. And I'm one of those campaigning to stop the British government authorizing the sale of weapons to this grisly dictatorship for all the reasons I've given. Not just Yemen, by the way, and not just Syria, and not just because of their internal repression, not just because just a few years ago they invaded Bahrain to crush the democracy protests there, but because they are the ideological, theological fountainhead of the extremism that is placing all of us in danger. In London, who here in London would be surprised if tomorrow morning, God forbid, some terrorist atrocity took place, if we woke up and switched on the news and discovered some terrorist atrocity had taken place? And who of us would be surprised if it did, that it would have been carried out by people whose mindset springs from this fountainhead, of which Saudi Arabia is the central component? Hillary Clinton's own emails, as released by WikiLeaks, just in the last few days, make it clear that she knows this. She says in her own emails that Saudi Arabia and at least one other dictatorship in the Persian Gulf area have been supplying money and weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. She said this in her own emails. That didn't stop her taking money from those very same people, but there's no doubt that she knows it. Britain and Europe is the battleground in which I'm engaged, and I think that there will be big changes in the British and European relationship to Saudi Arabia over the next 18 months to 2 years. Let's take another contribution. The gentleman, distinguished looking gentleman with the long white beard.
I just wanted to ask whether you could address the fundamental issue, the strategic issue behind Saudi's attack on Yemen, which is it not to do with the Israeli fear of the Iranians and the fact that a lot of the Shia in Yemen, the Houthis, are probably supported by the Iranians and the Iranians might be wanting to use it as a foothold, I don't know. Anyway, the Israelis are certainly frightened of it because Yemen is mentioned in their clean break document, a new strategy for securing the realm, as one of the countries that needs to be destabilized and the dictator removed.
Well, let me deal with something that is quite important, especially given who the audience of this show principally is. The Houthis are not Shiites. The Yemeni people are not Shiites. They are called Zaydis, which is neither Sunni nor Shia. They are not puppets of the Iranians. And as a matter of fact, Iran's help to the forces loyal to Ali Abdullah Saleh, the former president, has been extremely limited. And part of that is because it is logistically very difficult for Iran to help in a bigger way, but also Iran is following a foreign policy of some caution, not wishing to upset too many of the apple carts in the Gulf region. So it's important that we don't fall into the trap of imagining this to be yet another Sunni-Shia conflict. It isn't. And the leader of the rebels in Yemen, Ali Abdullah Saleh, is such an Iranian puppet, such a Shiite, that he was the president of Yemen for 33 years before he was overthrown. when he was badly wounded in the course of his overthrow, where did he go for the hospitalization, intensive care, and cosmetic rebuilding? He went to Saudi Arabia. He has the best possible relations over decades with Saudi Arabia. So to now paint him, the same man has suddenly become an Iranian puppet and a Shiite, is just ridiculous. Secondly, Israel is afraid of Iran, but probably not quite as afraid as Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is afraid of Iran because Iran is everything that Saudi Arabia is not. The Iranian leaders, whether you like them or not, are sincere to their ideology. And they are trying to build a society which reflects that ideology. And they refuse to be ordered around by Western governments. They refuse to recognize Israel. They refuse to cease their support for the Palestinian people. They refuse all the orders of Western governments, and therefore they are the isolated ones. Saudi Arabia is afraid of Iran because of its revolutionary potential in the region. Israel, no doubt, would like to cut Iran down to size. The Israelis have no problem with Iranians. The relations between the Shah and Israel could not possibly have been warmer or closer. One of the biggest buildings in Tehran was the Israeli embassy in Iran before the overthrow of the Shah. So it's not that the Israelis don't like Iranians or they don't like Shiites. They just don't like the kind of Iranians, the kind of Shiites that are running Iran now. Now, let me hear from some Yemenis. Let me hear from a Yemeni and then I'll come to you, madam. Go ahead.
Hi, George. My name's Fahad Abid Abdul Rashid. I'm a teacher.
Okay.
I was born over here, but my family originally from Yemen. I just spent 2 years in Yemen. Just got back a few months back. My question to you and to other people of the audience is, why is Ali Abdullah Saleh still in Yemen? While I was out there, I was actually stuck trying to get out of the country. I was working in Sana'a in an English school, and then I went down to Aden when the war started, and I was working there with Doctors Without Borders. So I saw a lot of things with my own eyes, documented a lot of things. And one question that kept coming into my mind was, why have they not taken Ali Abdullah Saleh out of the game? I mean, the Yemeni people want peace. A lot of people are pushing their own agendas. I don't believe Saudi Arabia cares about the Yemeni people. I can honestly say that. And I don't believe the British people do, British government, care either, because they're not exercising any restraint when they're selling these weapons, which I think they should be, looking to see what the people are doing with, what the governments are doing with these weapons. They're killing a lot of innocent people. Bombs are landing in places where they shouldn't be landing. And I just think with all that technology, why have they not just taken out the head, so to speak, of this problem? So I just want to know what your
Well, I don't know where he is, and if I did, I wouldn't tell you, because I'd be telling them. I don't know where he is. I don't know how easy he is to strike. He has been almost killed before, as I mentioned, in the original revolution that overthrew him. He then fled to Saudi Arabia and stayed there for, I don't know, I think he stayed there for a period of a couple of years. I may be wrong about the time span, but he was a very welcome house guest for the very Saudis who are now trying to kill him and are killing thousands of people because they can't kill him. But even if they killed him, what would that change? By the way, I'm not a supporter of Ali Abdullah Saleh. I supported his overthrow. So I'm not here to hold any flags for him. But if they killed him, what difference would that make? The political change that's going on in Yemen has a power and a momentum of its own. The real lesson in this is, don't interfere in other people's civil conflicts. What does it matter to us? What do we care if Ali Abdullah Saleh or Mr. Bean is the president of Yemen. That's a matter for the people of Yemen only. It's nothing to do with us. And it's this constant interference in other people's internal affairs. And then you have to build an elaborate propaganda superstructure. It's Iran, it's Shiism, it's. And then you have to sell weapons to one side in order that they prevail. And what difference would it make if the Saudi side won this conflict? Yemen would still be the poorest country in the Arab world, one of the poorest countries in the entire world. It has now been bombed back to the Stone Age, except many parts of Yemen weren't far from the Stone Age in the first place. So what's it all about? Why is it our business? Why are we doing it? I know why the weapons dealers are doing it, because they want the money. But why are the British politicians going along with it? We'll continue that discussion after this. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing events far from London, but not so far, because we're so intimately and deeply involved in them. We're discussing the West's relations with the Saudi Arabian regime, and in particular our arming and fueling of Saudi Arabia's internal repression and external aggression. The كلمة حرة camera was out on the streets of London earlier. Here's what some more of the people had to say.
The US is going to impose JUSTA. Will this have an impact on the arms trade?
Yeah, I think it should actually, and I hope it does.
I think that anything that improves accountability will mean that states can no longer act exactly as they wish, so could potentially lead to less dealing of arms to authoritarian governments and things like that.
Yeah, I think so, because if they're trying to say that Saudi are responsible for 9/11, surely that would follow then that they'd be like, okay, we'll stop providing you with weapons.
Oh, that's a good question, whether it'll have an impact on the arms trade. Potentially it will. I mean, I think there will be a lot more public fear when all of this starts to come out from the woodwork.
How do you think Saudi will retaliate against the US because of JUSTA?
I presume they could do counterclaims, stating how US has been involved in human rights abuses around the world.
A lot of unrest. I think there'll be a lot of animosity.
I think it will lead to a lot of conflict, even if it's not like physical conflict, but actual unrest and disharmony.
I think that there'll be more terror attacks, which just brings it back onto the US's fault, because they're the ones who originally armed them. And I also think that they'll remove their investments from the US as well.
Well, they obviously get a good education at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. Let's hear from the lady in the second row.
نادية عبد الهادي، ناشطة سياسية من اليمن. السؤال هو إلى أي مدى يستطيع الرأي السياسي المناهض للحرب ضد اليمن، إلى أي مدى يستطيع أن يتعاون مع الجمعيات والمنظمات الغير حكومية من أجل العمل على فك الحصار على الشعب اليمني البري البحري أو الجوي، طالما والحكومات الغربية منشغلة إلى حد الآن ببيع أكبر كمية من السلاح للسعودية من أجل قتل اليمنيين.
Well, I think the mass of the British people don't know anything about the war in Yemen. In fact, of the British broadcasters, only the niche news market of Channel 4 News has any real appreciation of what's going on. Now, that's partly because Yemen is a poor country that doesn't have things that we want, and therefore we're not interested. And it's partly because the Arabs are murdering each other elsewhere in such huge numbers that why would anyone pay attention to a war in Yemen killing a few thousand people when Arabs are killing hundreds of thousands of other Arabs elsewhere in the Middle East. But the political class is very definitely engaged now in this subject. And as I told you, the Select Committee on Foreign Affairs, which is a conservative majority, had a unanimous report in the end. There were some people who walked out to try and make the meeting inquarate and try and block it in one way or another. But the committee was very powerful in its conclusions that there can be no case for us selling weapons to Saudi Arabia whilst it is committing atrocities in Yemen. And the particular atrocity to which I drew attention earlier, the bombing of the funeral, which killed well over 100 people and injured hundreds more, this was carried out by weaponry that may very well have been British. It was certainly American or British. It depends which of the company's factories actually produced that particular munition, because they have factories in both Britain and the US. So this caused the British and American governments to panic slightly and has begun a process, I think, that will lead to change. But it's the job of all of us and campaigners on the issue in particular to use whatever influence they can. I'm not a big fan of NGOs myself, and I wouldn't put too much trust in their ability to carry this message, but we have to get the word about what's happening in Yemen much more widely into the civil society, into the broader population. Let's hear from the lady at the front.
Greetings, George. I'm Kim Sharif. I am a solicitor, and I am a human rights activist as well, been more at the forefront because of the Yemen situation. I'm originally from the south of Yemen, Hadramaut. I've grown up here, so all my education, everything is here. I'm more of a Rosalie Brown than I am perhaps a Hadramiya. I think one of the biggest issues that we're not addressing heads-on is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy, which is very dangerous for the international platform at the moment from legal perspective. I can tell you and guarantee you that this man who is staying in this hotel in Riyadh has no legitimacy settled. This is a long debate. Another time I'll be able to show you the evidence which I have. Secondly, the getting together and bombarding this country without express authority from the UN to use force is simply illegal. Thirdly, the blockade is just illegal. Therefore, because if the beginning of the actions and everything else that comes with it is therefore illegal, ab initio illegal, and anything that flows from it is illegal. What is now going on is genocide by this illegal blockade.
There's mass starvation as a result of this blockade.
Indeed. Now, where is the danger for us here in the UK? As an established, oldest democracy in the world, one of our core values is to uphold the rule of law and democracy. Now, we've stopped doing that. Of course, Blair has set precedent, as you said, in the case of Mr. Bandar bin Sultan. It's a clear case of criminal behavior. He should have been indicted. How you solve the issue later on is a matter, another day's conversation, but they haven't done that. Why is it dangerous for us here in the UK? We have an unwritten constitution. And where you have the executive taking the mickey out of the judiciary in that way, that means we are at risk. Okay? Furthermore, from the international platform perspective, we have a regime that is by definition a rogue regime, a known criminal. Because, let's just go to Just the Law, for example. Just the Law already identifies for us that the members of the Saudi regime were involved in 9/11. 9/11 was the beginning of this business of war against terror. So many people have been rectally fed. So many people have been disappeared. So much has happened since, and we all know. We've lost all our liberties here in the UK. All that I knew as basic classical English law has gone. We don't have that anymore. All of that to fight war on terror. Now, 16 years later, we discover that the criminal that we've been elusively coming after for so many years and destroying so many lives over the process of it happens to be who you just described as our best friend. Now, the decent thing to do after justice, especially now that it's been published and it's all known, the decent and honorable thing, the legal thing to do is indict this regime. Simple. It's a criminal behavior. You've got a rogue regime. Once you have a rogue regime, by definition, under international law, it is illegal to sell them weapons. Under international law, under European law, and the UK law. And for your information, there is a case going on right now, brought to court by CAT, Campaign Against Arms Trade. And that is challenging the UK government's legal position vis-à-vis selling weapons or continuing to sell weapons to the Saudi regime in light of the Yemen situation. The problem that we are not addressing head on is that this parliament has got us involved in a war without parliamentary approval. So there's so much more that I can tell you. There's so much hypocrisy and illegality going on, which is very, very dangerous for international relations, because we now have a system of absolute chaos, as simple as that. And what rules is rogue regimes like the Saudi regime that is supplying terrorism to the world. It is, because Talibans are Wahhabis, Al-Shabaabs are Wahhabis, Boko Haram are Wahhabis, Daesh are Wahhabis, Al-Qaeda are Wahhabis. Everybody who does this kind of butchering anywhere in the world is a Wahhabi. It's a fact. For your own information, which is a very useful thing that has happened recently, beautiful, our brothers in the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah got together in a big conference in Chechnya where they denounced the Wahhabi regime as being outside the Sunnah. If it is outside the Sunnah, therefore, by definition, it is outside Shia. Therefore, it is not within the fold of Islam. So to call the Saudi regime Islamic is actually wrong. And therefore, I ask all civil societies and anyone who cares about this great country, which I love, it is my country, to stand up now and apply the law of this land and the law that we are obliged to comply with and apply, which is the international rules of law. To this day, we haven't actually Brexited. We are still within Europe. Therefore, we must apply these laws. And if we don't, then we are, by definition, criminals. If you aid and abet, if you know a known criminal, and you know he is a murderer, and then you go and give him knives and guns and bombs, what do you think he's going to do with it? Play with it in the garden? No, he's going to go and murder people. So by law, under English law, you are aiding and abetting a very serious crime, and you are a criminal. Now, by definition, from what is going on in the world today, we in Britain are really in a very, very dangerous and frightening situation. I ask my fellow Brits to stand up and say, let's restore the integrity of this parliament and the system of this country, and let's be what we used to be and stop playing with criminals and known hoodlums like the Saudi rogue regime. That's a butcher. You've said it. 16-year-old boy is sentenced to crucifixion, beheadings, hanging and quartering. Why? Because he just stood up and wanted to speak his mind. Is that allowed? Am I allowed to go and deal? This is, to me, paedophiliac of a kind. It's a brutal kind of paedophilia to me. It is child abuse. How can we go and have relations? I do understand here in Britain we've destroyed our industries in the 80s. We've got nothing left for us to export other than weapons and security. May I recommend that we make them the luxurious yachts and airplanes and private jets they love instead, because BAE can do that, and we will still make the money. And above all, our obligation is to stand now and apply the rule of law and prosecute this regime, because it is a criminal regime. Thank you.
Madam, in the 5 years I have been making this show, that was the best contribution from any audience member that I have ever heard. And I'm going to make a prediction to you. Over the next days, you're going to be a YouTube sensation, and millions of people are going to watch it. Secondly, if I'm ever in trouble, la samahallah, I want you as my lawyer. But thirdly, I'm afraid you're defending a Britain that never existed. And it pains me to point it out to you.
I do recognize that.
Well, no, because we're running out of time and I'm speaking
It does
now.
exist, it does. And I am coming from the legal fraternity,
Yes,
and our
but
system
it's
is
all
the
a
best in the
facade.
world.
It's all a farce.
Yeah.
And it's always been a farce. Ask him. He's Sudanese. What law, what civilization, what morals
But you see, I'm
were
a woman.
involved in us
I'm a
going
woman.
to his country or her country, India? We went there to steal all their things. All this democracy and law is just lipstick on a pig. That's all it is. It's lipstick on a pig. And lipstick, as you well know, can be wiped off just like that. And whenever they don't want to wear it anymore, they just wipe it off. So I beg of you not to invest in the British, the political class. Look, when I was 9 years old, I came home, I told my Irish grandfather that the teacher had said that the British had an empire so vast that on it the sun never set. This is what he said in reply. That's because God would never trust the British in the dark. And that's the truth of it. So let's argue for a new Britain, not a return to an old Britain that never existed, because that way lies failure. Let's say we've always had a country for 250 years at least, maybe 300, that went around the world invading and occupying other people's countries to steal their things, and we increasingly pretended over the 350 years that for our own people there was liberty, there was law, there was freedom, and ultimately in the 20th century there was democracy. It's just a facade, and it's torn down by the kind of powerful argument that you just made. And that's exactly what we should concentrate on. You're going to be a YouTube sensation, notwithstanding my objections just quoted, because you spoke to what British people in their hearts would like to be. They would like to be, but their rulers never have been. A scorpion stings because it's a scorpion. And the British state behaves like it does because it is the British state. More after this. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television. We're having a cracking debate here in the London studio audience, and I hope everyone is finding it illuminating. I certainly am. Last segment, I want to get everybody in that wants to speak. Yes, sir.
محمد البيض سياسي مستقل. I'm living in this country for roughly now 15 years. No doubt the war in Yemen is American war, because the foreign minister for Saudi Arabia, Al-Jubair, he announced the war from Washington. There's no doubt. I'm from South. I'm against this war. Definitely, with no doubt for me and anyone in Yemen, this American war involved in this criminal war against our people in Yemen. And the British, they are as a puppy following the American order. Even the Gulf countries as well, they don't have no choice to
They're beginning to lose enthusiasm for it.
That's right.
Egypt has withdrawn. Pakistan refused to join.
They are American puppy. The Gulf countries are American puppies. You know, they don't have control the international law. They don't have the control for their own relationship with the other countries. They just follow the order from the CIA and the Pentagon. That's it.
Absolutely correct.
That's
Please
right.
give the microphone to the lady behind you.
سامية الحسيني من لبنان، أستاذة وناشطة اجتماعية. أولا كنت أن أجيب على الأستاذ تشار حينما تحدث عن بيع الأسلحة، أن من حقهم بيع الأسلحة لجني الأرباح. بالطبع كل دولة تحب أن تجني الأرباح ومن حقها أن تجني الأرباح، ولكن ليس على حساب قتل المظلومين والأبرياء والأطفال والنساء الأمينين في بيوتهم. وألا يكفي أمريكا والدول الأوروبية الأخرى أيضا جنيها من النفط أنها تضع يدها على النفط، تستخرجه، تبيعه، تستهلكه، تتاجر به، تربح من خلاله. يعني ألا يكفي تلك الأرباح تريد أن تتاجر بالدماء أيضا لتجني الأرباح كما قال الأستاذ. ونحن جميعنا نناقش هذه المسألة، أنه هل نحن نوافق أو نرفض أن نمنع أمريكا من بيعها السلاح للسعودية. مهما قلنا أعتقد لن نصل إلى نتيجة، لأن السعودية وأمريكا واحد. يعني لا أمريكا حتشيل إيدها عن السعودية ولا السعودية حتتخلى عن أمريكا، لأنهما يعني اثنيناتهم بحاجة لبعض. وبعدين بحب ضيف نقطة أنه أمريكا قديش هي مدتها بالسلاح للسعودية، رغم الامدادات الهائلة لها بالسلاح حتى الآن السعودية لا تستطيع أن تحصل أمنها الداخلي، أنها فقط تحصل الأمن لهم لأنفسهم، لأنها غير ديمقراطية، لأنها لا تسعى لتأمين الأمن لشعبها، لأن الشعب كله ضدها. فقد ما هن حيعطون سلاح فقط لأنفسهم. بتمنى انه نضل نحن، رغم انه هن اذا امريكا مش حترفع ايدها، لانه ما حتترك يعني السعوديه بهيدي الورطه لحالها، مش حتتركها. لانه اذا تركتها للسعوديه لانه اذا تركت السعوديه بنفسها او تخلت عنها امريكا، هيدا الشيء حيقوي الطرف الاخر المقاوم، الاطراف الاخرى المقاومه، مثلا ايران وغيرها. فبالتأكيد لن ترفع يدها، ولكن لابد أن نرفع صوتنا دائما ونناهض ونجاهد ونطالب بكل مكان وزمان لإيقاف هذا العنف ولإيقاف هذه الحرب الشعواء. شكرا لكم.
As I said earlier, we're not just selling them weapons. We are in the war room. We are helping to direct the bombardment. We are helping to keep the planes in the sky. We are helping to load the weapons that we sold. That's my view. Gentleman next to you, yes.
Abu Saud from Harrow. The original question was how to stop Britain or United States to sell the arms. All of us as British, we can support campaign against arms trade, give them a strong hand, and try to get 100,000 signature on Yemen to have a debate in United States Parliament and United Kingdom Parliament. Why, when the arms were sold to any country, any rogue country, they always sign that it's not going to be used for their own people, or we're not going to use.
That's what like the law says that.
Law says that.
It's illegal to sell weapons.
Correct.
Except for these two caveats being honored.
That's right. Now we got a proxy war from America. They're having aircraft carriers and all sort of thing in their borders, which is a naval blockade. You know why? Because Aramco has made 20 times or 50 times more what they put in initially in 1920s and 30s for the oil. What they say, if this type of Arab Spring, which quelled by Saudis and Dubai government in Tunisia and Egypt, if this come back to them, the government will topple. And eventually, America is going to lose more than Saudi did.
That's why
they have to go back to having date or milk in their tent.
That's why they should get rid of the current regime very quickly, so they can somehow manage a transition that isn't a disaster for them. Yes, sir, quickly.
Yeah, Muhammad Saad from Lebanon. I'm a dentist. The big question is, Saudi regime are the creators of ISIS and this kind of spreading disease cancers. Out of the ideology of ISIS, we can see that they are like an autoimmune disease. Will it like return back to Saudi? And all this violence that Saudi is spreading will come back to Saudi.
Well, just remember my Chairman Mao story about the huge rock, which you then drop on your own feet. Let me go along here. This gentleman here has been trying to get in.
دكتور معي السلام من اليمن. سؤالي هو هل الدول التي شاركت في الحرب ضد اليمن سواء بالأسلحة أو باستخدام الأقمار الصناعية، هل يوجد قانون دولي يمكن اليمن بمقاضاة هذه الدول كونها مشاركة في التدمير بشكل مباشر أو غير مباشر؟
Well, yes, we have. There
As
is
you
a
already
case.
know, I've not got much confidence.
A case
in
has been
international
presented
law.
against Tony Blair for war crimes in Iraq about 3 weeks ago. This is the first time, and we are confident it will succeed. We have an international team of lawyers, barristers, experts, and we have formed a league that this regime will be prosecuted almost everywhere in the world, rest assured. I am a member of that team.
Alhamdulillah. Bravo. Bravo. You go ahead, sir.
Hi, Abbas Zabara. I think the most fundamental issue here, it's not just the fact that the Americans and the British are selling millions and billions of pounds of arms to the Saudi government. I think it's also the military support
I don't
that
think,
they
by
are...
the way, we should call it a government.
Okay.
Why should Bashar al-Assad be a regime, but the Saudi Arabians have got a government?
The Saudis.
The Saudi regime, the Saudi dictatorship. Go on.
So you know, it's not just you know, the selling of weapons. It is also military support, logistic support, secret intelligence. You have you know, warships across the Arabian Peninsula refueling Saudi tanks. The truth of the matter is, the Saudis, the Brits, are a strategic partner in this war, and they have been since the start of the coalition. And Charles, I'm really sorry. I have a question to you based on what you said earlier. I completely understand international relationships. You have to keep a close relationship with various countries, which is completely understandable. My question to you is, how do you justify the selling of arms? How do you justify that? And it's the question that I asked earlier on. How do you justify the selling of arms with the amount of innocent lives that have died? And this is to yourself, to an American.
First off, thank you. I was moved by the lady who spoke before. Like I said, I was counting the Americas. And also, I was very moved by the lady up front here. And it was nice to also hear this disownership of the Wahhabism and what it, you know, I think that's, you know, I think sometimes people from the Islamic world, you know, always get this blame. And it's like, why do we have to and all that aside, it was nice to hear it said, because that's something I believe. I don't think that, you know, every Muslim, just because they're a Muslim, is somehow connected to, you know, members of Al-Qaeda or what have you. But I think an answer to the question is a couple things. One, if it's not us, it'll be somebody else. It's going to happen, unfortunately. And again, I would also say we don't live in a vacuum. So, you know, I'm not an expert on these things, and this is a part of the world I'm especially not an expert on, I'll be honest. You know, it bothers me to see human life lost as well, especially innocent human life. And it's just, sometimes I think it's things we don't have an answer for. And I wish we did, but we don't.
Do you feel it's acceptable?
No, it's not acceptable. But unfortunately, you know, especially if you're in a war situation. Again, I don't fully understand the Yemeni side of this. But there are times in war where, unfortunately, civilians get killed. And, you know, you do everything you can to avoid it. But it's a situation where if you don't get yourself involved in this war or an action or whatever, and civilians don't get killed, it could be your own civilians that get killed. You know?
But the problem is, Charles, it's the opposite that is the truth. First of all, the argument that if we don't do it, someone else will, is the argument of every heroin dealer in the world. If I don't sell him this heroin, somebody else is going to sell it.
But there is.
By the way, Charlie, even in the facade of British justice, that defence wouldn't get you far.
Well, you know, but I think...
Yes, Your Honour, I sold him the heroin, but if I hadn't done it, he would have done it.
Yeah, but...
It's not a defence in
George,
any legal or moral system.
To be fair, though, in international relations, it's a little bit of a different competition between drug dealer A and drug dealer B. You know, you're talking about the sort of competition between other countries.
No,
And
it's
listen,
worse.
listen,
it's worse. Heroin is a big killer.
Yeah, I know.
But not as big a killer as those weapons.
I know.
Those weapons
I
kill
agree.
many more people than heroin does.
I agree.
Look, I'm winding up now, so you need to let me speak. The argument that it somehow protects our civilians is the opposite of the truth. The stronger these extremists get, the more endangered our people are. That's why I'm optimistic, because I think, to use an English phrase, the penny has dropped. The cent or the dime has dropped. The quarter has dropped in the United States as well as here. People realize that without this Wahhabist Saudi regime, extremism in the world would not be the clear and present danger to all of us that it is. And therefore, to keep loading arms and political and diplomatic support into the Saudi regime is only actually endangering our security. It's doing nothing whatsoever to preserve it. So I'm not naive. I don't believe that foreign policy will ever be in any country entirely ethical or entirely consistent. But there are lines across which it is abundantly clear that this policy is wrong. This policy of backing Saudi Arabia, arming Saudi Arabia, making apologies for it, being an appeaser of it, is going to lead to an even greater disaster than we have already suffered. Your people have lost thousands in 1 minute on 9/11. The French, the Belgians, German people, British people, and all over the Muslim world, 10 times more, have already paid with their life's blood because of this dictatorship in Saudi Arabia. It's been marvelous. Thank you very much.